The bright artificial lights of the film set finally dimmed, leaving a chaotic afterglow of tangled cables and weary crew members. The director's final, booming cut. And that's a wrap for today. Echoed through the massive soundstage, a signal of freedom for most. For the man at the center of it all, it was just the end of one performance and the beginning of the quiet, solitary journey back to himself. He peeled off the heavy, unfamiliar costume, the weight of the character lifting from his shoulders with each piece he removed. Underneath, he was just a man in a simple t-shirt, his face smudged with makeup, his eyes holding a deep-seated tiredness that went far beyond a long day's work. A production assistant approached, phone in hand, ready to call his car. "It's okay," he said with a small, polite wave of his hand. "I think I'll just walk for a bit." The assistant nodded, accustomed to the actor's unpredictable need for solitude. He didn't want the bubble of a quiet, air-conditioned car. He wanted to feel the city, to taste the air, to be anonymous in the sprawling ocean of Los Angeles. He pulled on a worn jacket and a pair of jeans, the kind of clothes that made him blend in, and slipped out a side door into the cool, overcast afternoon. The air was thick with the promise of rain, a rarity in this city, and the gray sky seemed to muffle the usual roar of traffic. He started walking with no particular destination in mind, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He passed storefronts with their flashy displays and people rushing home from their own jobs, each lost in their own world. He was just another face in the crowd, a tall figure with a thoughtful stride, and that was exactly what he wanted. The city, with all its noise and its loneliness, felt like a comfort. It was a place where a person could be completely surrounded and yet entirely alone, a feeling he understood all too well. His thoughts drifted, as they often did on these walks, through memories both sweet and painful. He carried his own history of loss, a quiet sorrow that had settled into his bones over the years, and in the anonymity of the crowd, he could sit with it without being seen. He was a man who had known incredible heights but had also navigated profound valleys. And it was in these simple, unplanned walks that he felt most grounded, most human. Miles away, but in the very same city. Another world was contained within the four doors of an aging sedan parked on a quiet, tree-lined street. This world was much smaller, but its gravity was infinitely heavier. Inside, a young woman sat huddled in the back seat, her body curled around the small, fragile life that was her entire universe. The car was her home, her shelter, and her prison. In the front passenger seat, a makeshift crib crafted from a laundry basket and lined with every clean blanket she owned, held her 3-week-old son. He was sleeping now, his tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was the only music she truly heard anymore. His breath was a warm puff against her cheek, a constant living reminder of what she was fighting for. The air inside the car was thick and stale, a mix of baby powder, the sour scent of old coffee, and the faint, sweet smell of the baby's skin. A fine layer of dust coated the dashboard, and a crack in the windshield, shaped like a tiny lightning bolt, was a permanent feature of her view. Every noise from the outside world, a distant siren, the bark of a neighbor's dog, the slam of a car door sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her body. She lived in a state of constant, low-grade fear, a humming anxiety that never truly left her. She was afraid of being discovered and told to move on. She was afraid of the cold night that was coming, of the car engine refusing to start one morning. But more than anything, she was afraid of failing this tiny, perfect human who depended on her for absolutely everything. Her stomach ached with a hunger she had learned to ignore, and her eyes burned with an exhaustion so deep it felt like a part of her soul. Just a few months ago, her life had been normal. She had a small apartment, a job that paid the bills, and a future she was planning. Then, like a row of dominoes, it all fell apart. The company she worked for downsized, and her position was eliminated. The eviction notice came just 2 weeks after her last paycheck. The calls to family, the ones she had always been too proud to make, were met with polite but firm apologies and reasons why they couldn't help. Pride, she now understood, was a luxury she could no longer afford. So here she was, a mother with a newborn, living in a car, her world shrunk to this small, uncomfortable space. She gently stroked her son's downy hair, her heart aching with a love so fierce it was painful. She would do anything for him. She would endure this. She would find a way. But as the sky outside grew darker and the temperature began to drop, a wave of hopelessness, cold and sharp, washed over her. She pulled a thin blanket more tightly around them both, closed her eyes, and whispered a silent prayer into the quiet, suffocating darkness of the car. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the underbellies of the clouds in shades of orange and pink that were quickly swallowed by the encroaching gray. The man's walk had taken him deeper into a neighborhood of quiet bungalows and tree-lined streets, a world away from the glitz of the film sets he inhabited. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp scent of earth and the distant smell of evening meals being prepared. He was lost in the rhythm of his own footsteps, a steady beat against the pavement, when a sound cut through the evening hum. It was faint at first, almost a whisper, but it was a sound that demanded attention. It was the cry of a baby. It wasn't the loud, angry wail of a child who was simply unhappy. It was a thinner, more fragile sound, a whimper that spoke of discomfort and a deep, unmet need. He stopped walking, his head tilting as he tried to locate the source. The sound seemed to be coming from a row of cars parked along the curb. He listened intently, the city noise fading into the background as his focus narrowed. There it was again, a small, heartbreaking cry from a modest-looking sedan a few yards away. He could see a slight fog on the inside of the windows, a telltale sign of breath against the cool glass. A knot of concern tightened in his stomach. It was late for a baby to be out, and the sound was one of distress, not just fussiness. He approached the car slowly, his footsteps deliberately soft on the pavement. He was acutely aware of how this must look, a tall man approaching a woman alone in a car as darkness fell. He knew he had to be careful, to make his intentions clear without causing alarm. He didn't go straight to the driver's side door, but angled his approach towards the rear, keeping his hands open and visible at his sides. As he got closer, he could see the silhouette of a woman inside, her body curved protectively over a small bundle in her arms. He saw her gently rocking, her movements a silent, desperate attempt to soothe the child. The sight struck him with a profound sadness. This wasn't a family on a road trip who had pulled over for a moment. This was something else entirely. He could feel the isolation radiating from the car, a small bubble of silent struggle in the middle of a bustling city. He paused for a moment, giving her a chance to notice him, but her entire world was focused on the baby in her arms. Taking a quiet breath, he raised his hand and tapped lightly on the window. The sound barely louder than the baby's cry. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The woman's body jerked as if she'd been struck, her head snapping up, her eyes wide with a primal terror that he could feel even through the glass. Her whole body tensed, becoming a shield between him and her child. In that split second he saw not just fear, but a fierce, protective readiness, a wild animal cornered with its young. He immediately took a half step back, raising both his hands palms out in a universal gesture of peace. He didn't speak right away, giving her a moment to see that he was no threat. He kept his expression soft, his eyes gentle, trying to project every ounce of non-threatening calm he could muster. He could see her chest heaving, her eyes locked on him, assessing, calculating the danger. The baby, startled by her sudden movement, let out a stronger cry. "I'm so sorry to bother you," he said finally, his voice low and soft, barely carrying through the closed window. "I don't mean to scare you. I was just walking by and I heard a baby cry. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay." He didn't move, didn't lower his hands. He just stood there, a patient, non-threatening presence on the quiet street. He knew that any sudden move could send her into a panic. He waited, letting his words hang in the cool evening air. Inside the car, the woman's mind was racing. This was it. This was the moment she had been dreading for weeks. The knock on the window. The discovery. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she could barely hear. She looked at the man's face, searching for signs of malice or mockery, but she saw only a kind of weary concern in his eyes. He didn't look like a police officer or a security guard. He just looked like a man. His voice, when he spoke, wasn't harsh or demanding. It was quiet, respectful. The sheer, unexpected civility of it was more disarming than any threat could have been. Her fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but for the first time in a long time, it was met with something else. A flicker of curiosity. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the wall of terror she had built around herself. Her eyes darted from his face to her baby, who was starting to cry in earnest now, small, weak cries that tore at her heart. She was so tired. So bone-achingly tired of being strong, of being scared, of holding the entire world together in the back seat of a car. She didn't have the energy to run, not that she had anywhere to go. With a trembling hand, she reached for the window controls. The motor whirred softly as the glass lowered, stopping just a fraction of an inch. It was a test. A tiny, vulnerable opening. The cool night air rushed into the stuffy car, carrying with it the scent of rain and the man's faint, clean smell. Through the crack she could see him more clearly. He was older than she'd first thought, with lines etched around his eyes that spoke of a life lived, of sorrows known. He still held his hands up, a gesture of surrender. He waited patiently, not pushing, not demanding she open the window further. He just stood there on the sidewalk, a solitary figure in the gathering dusk, and in his eyes she saw no judgment. Only a quiet, profound empathy that made her want to weep. The cool night air that slipped through the tiny crack in the window felt like a shock to her system, a stark contrast to the stale, warm breathlessness inside the car. It carried the scent of damp pavement and distant rain. The man on the other side of the glass remained perfectly still, his hands still raised in a gesture of surrender. His eyes in the dimming light seemed to hold no threat, only a quiet, steady inquiry. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the baby's soft, fretful whimpers. Inside her, a war was raging. Every instinct screamed at her to roll the window up, start the engine, and drive away as fast as she could. But where would she go? And more importantly, how could she, when her arms were full of her son, and her heart was full of a fear so heavy it felt like a stone in her chest? She was just so tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being strong. "Thank you," the man said, his voice still a low, gentle murmur. "Thank you for opening the window." He didn't ask her to open it more. He didn't move closer. He simply acknowledged her small, terrified act of trust. It was so unexpected, so utterly devoid of demand, that it disarmed her completely. He slowly lowered his hands, letting them rest loosely at his sides. "I don't want to intrude," he continued, his gaze shifting from her eyes to the small bundle in her arms and then back again. I heard the little one crying, and I couldn't walk away without knowing if you were all right." He paused, choosing his next words with immense care. "Are you warm enough in here?" The question was so simple, so basic, yet it hit her with the force of a tidal wave. Warmth? She hadn't been truly warm in weeks. She had been living in a state of perpetual chill, a cold that seeped into her bones, no matter how many blankets she piled on. Her pride had kept her from admitting it even to herself. But his gentle question, asked with such genuine concern, broke through the dam she had built around her heart. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path through the grime on her cheek. She couldn't find her voice to answer, so she just shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible movement. He saw it. He saw the tear, the slight shake of her head. His expression softened, a wave of something that looked like profound sadness washing over his features. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say everything would be okay. Instead, he asked another simple, practical question. "When was the last time you ate something?" That was the question that broke her. Not the fear, not the cold, not the shame of her situation, but that simple, human inquiry. Her stomach, which had been a tight, aching knot of hunger for so long she'd gotten used to it, suddenly twisted with a painful cramp. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, ragged sound that she couldn't hold back. The baby in her arms, startled by the sudden tremor in his mother's body, began to cry in earnest, his weak wails a mirror to her own despair. She tried to shush him, to rock him, but her own body was shaking with silent, wrenching sobs. The man on the sidewalk watched her, his patience unwavering. He didn't try to stop her crying or tell her to be strong. He just stood there, a solid, silent witness to her pain. He let her cry, giving her the space to release some of the terrible pressure she had been carrying alone for so long. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he spoke again, his voice even softer than before. "It's okay. Let it out. There's no one here to judge you." His words were a permission slip she didn't know she needed. The tears came faster now, and with them, the story began to pour out of her in fragmented, halting sentences. "I had a job," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "A small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was ours." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "They downsized. Just like that. And then, the rent. I just couldn't make it." She looked down at her son, her vision blurred. "I tried calling my family, but no one could or would help." The shame of that admission burned hot in her chest. I never thought I would be here." In a car. With him, she hugged the baby closer, as if she could physically absorb his fragility into her own body. "I'm so scared for him. All the time. I'm so scared I'm failing him." As she spoke, the man did something that surprised her. He didn't stay standing, looking down on her. He took a few steps back, and then slowly he sat down on the cold concrete curb right next to her car door. He rested his elbows on his knees, his posture open and relaxed. He was no longer a figure of authority or a potential threat. He was just a person, sitting on the ground, sharing her space on the quiet street. The simple act of lowering himself to her level was more powerful than any words of comfort he could have offered. It erased the distance between them, creating a small, sacred circle of shared humanity in the growing darkness. He listened to every word she said, his gaze focused and unwavering. He didn't interrupt or offer advice. He just listened. When she finished, her story hanging in the air between them, he was quiet for a long moment. The streetlights had flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. The baby had quieted again, his small body exhausted from the crying. "It's a heavy thing to carry all by yourself," he said finally, his voice quiet but clear. He wasn't looking at her anymore, but out at the empty street as if he were speaking from his own experience. Loving someone that much and being so afraid for them. "It's the heaviest thing in the world." He looked back at her then, and in his eyes she saw a depth of understanding that took her breath away. He wasn't just pitying her. He saw her. He saw the courage it took to keep going, the fierce, protective love that was the only thing keeping her and her son alive. He didn't see a statistic or a problem to be solved. He saw a mother fighting an impossible battle. "You haven't failed him," he said, his voice firm with a quiet conviction. "You're here. You're protecting him. That's the opposite of failing." He looked from her tired face to the baby sleeping in her arms. "He's beautiful. What's his name?" She hesitated for a second, then told him his name. The sound of her son's name, spoken by this kind stranger in the calm of the evening, felt like a small blessing. He nodded, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "That's a good name." He was quiet again, then he took a deep breath, and his expression changed. The gentle empathy was still there, but now it was mixed with a new resolve. He looked her straight in the eye, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You can't stay here tonight," he said. "It's not safe, and it's not warm enough for him. We need to figure something out. Right now." His words hung in the cool night air, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. A fact so simple, so absolute, that it bypassed her fear and settled deep within her. "You can't stay here tonight." The young woman stared at him, her mind struggling to process the shift in reality. For weeks, her world had been a tiny, suffocating space defined by survival. Every decision was about how to get through the next hour, the next night. The idea of a we, of someone else stepping into her small, desperate world to help figure things out, was a concept so foreign it felt like a dream. She opened her mouth to protest, to say that it was too much, that she couldn't accept help from a stranger, but the words wouldn't come. All that came out was another choked sob. The man seemed to understand her silent struggle. He didn't wait for an answer. He simply pulled a phone from his pocket, his movements calm and purposeful. Okay, he said, his voice steady and reassuring as if they were old friends making a plan. First things first, we need to get you both somewhere warm and safe for the night. He began to tap on his phone, his thumb moving quickly across the screen. I'm going to get you a car. A nice, warm one. And I'm booking you a suite at a hotel. Not just a room, a suite, so you'll have space to breathe and the little one can sleep properly. He spoke as he worked, explaining his actions, keeping her in the loop. It wasn't a command. It was a collaboration. Even though she was doing nothing but staring in stunned silence, she watched him, her tears slowing as her brain tried to catch up. A suite, a hotel. The words were magical, belonging to a life she had once lived, but felt was gone forever. I can't, she finally managed to whisper, the words feeling like sandpaper in her throat. I don't have any money. I can't pay you back. He looked up from his phone, his eyes meeting hers. They were serious, but there was no pity in them, only a firm kindness. You don't have to pay me back, ever. This isn't a loan. It's just what you do. You see someone who needs help, and you help them. That's all. He went back to his phone for a moment, then looked up again. The car will be here in 5 minutes. But before we go, you need things. For him. He nodded towards the baby, who was now sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the life-altering conversation happening just inches away. What does he need? Formula? Diapers? Anything at all? Her mind went blank. For so long, she had been rationing everything, making a single diaper last as long as possible, diluting formula to stretch it out. The thought of being able to ask for what she actually needed was overwhelming. He needs formula, she said, her voice trembling. And diapers. Size 1. He's almost out of both. She couldn't bring herself to ask for anything for herself. The man nodded, his expression thoughtful. Okay, formula and diapers. We'll stop on the way. He made another call, this time speaking to someone in a low voice. Hi, I need to set up an account at the all-night pharmacy on Fairfax. Yes, that one. The name is... Just put it under guest. I want the mother who is with the driver to be able to get whatever she needs for a newborn and for herself. No limit, just have her sign for it. He listened for a moment, then said, Thank you. He ended the call and looked at her. Done, you can get whatever you need. Clothes for him, wipes, a proper bottle warmer, anything, and get something for yourself too. Some real food, a change of clothes, whatever you want. Just then, a sleek black car pulled up silently to the curb. It was so clean it seemed to glow under the streetlights. The driver got out and opened the back door. The young woman looked from the car to the man, her heart pounding. This was really happening. She carefully gathered her son into her arms, clutching the worn blanket around him. As she moved to get out of her own car, she hesitated, looking back at the small, messy space that had been their whole world. It was hard to leave it, even though it was a prison. It was all she had known. The man seemed to understand. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't need to worry about this car, he said softly. I'll have someone take care of it. Your only job right now is to take care of yourself and your son. He guided her towards the waiting car, his hand a steady, reassuring presence on her back. She slid into the plush leather seat, the warmth of the car's interior enveloping her like a hug. It was the first time she had been truly warm in weeks. The man got on the other side and told the driver the name of the hotel. The ride to the pharmacy was a blur. She sat in stunned silence, cradling her son, watching the city lights streak past the window. It felt like she was watching a movie about someone else's life. At the pharmacy, the man didn't go in with her. He just handed her a credit card. Take your time, he said. Get everything you need? She walked into the brightly lit store, her son in her arms, and felt like she was in another world. She walked down the aisles, her eyes wide. For the first time in months, she didn't have to look at the price tags. She put the largest can of formula in the cart, a big box of diapers, soft baby clothes, lotion, and wipes. Then, remembering his words, she went to the food section and got a sandwich, a bottle of juice, and a salad for herself. It was the most surreal shopping trip of her life. Back in the car, the man was on the phone again. This time, she could hear his side of the conversation more clearly. "Yes, I need you to find a furnished apartment for a young mother and her newborn," he said, his voice low but firm. "Something safe, in a good neighborhood? A one-bedroom would be perfect. I'll cover the deposit and the first 6 months' rent, up front. And I need you to connect her with a social worker, someone good who can help her with job training and childcare resources. She deserves a fresh start. Make it happen." He ended the call and met her gaze in the dim light of the car. He didn't say anything about the call, just gave her a small, reassuring nod. The tears that fell now were not tears of fear or despair, but tears of pure, overwhelming gratitude. This man wasn't just saving her for one night. He was giving her back her life. He was giving her son a future. They arrived at the hotel, a beautiful, towering building with a revolving door. A bellman greeted them, and the man checked her in, handing her a key card for a large suite on a high floor. He walked her to the elevator and up to the room. He didn't go inside. He just waited at the door as she stepped in. The room was enormous, clean, and warm. A king-size bed with crisp white linens dominated one side, and a large window looked out over the glittering city. In the bathroom, she could see fluffy white towels and travel-sized soaps. It was paradise. She turned back to him, her heart so full of emotion she thought it might burst. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Thank you. Thank you doesn't seem like enough." A gentle, genuine smile touched his lips. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Just get a good night's sleep. Both of you. There's fresh food and drinks in the minibar. Help yourself. I'll call you in the morning to check in." He started to turn away, then paused. "You're a good mother," he said, his voice quiet but full of conviction. "Never forget that." And with that, he was gone, leaving her standing in the silent, beautiful room, holding her sleeping son, her heart finally, after so long, filled with hope. The first rays of the morning sun slipped through the heavy curtains of the hotel suite, painting a soft stripe of light across the plush carpet. For a moment, the young woman felt a familiar jolt of panic, the disorienting feeling of waking up in an unfamiliar place. Then she felt the gentle weight of her son sleeping beside her on the enormous, soft bed, and the memory of the previous night came flooding back. It wasn't a dream. The quiet man, the warm car, the hotel room. It was all real. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake the baby, and looked around. The room was immaculate, a world away from the cramped, dusty interior of her car. For the first time in a very long time, she felt a sense of peace, a quiet stillness in her soul that was so unfamiliar it almost felt strange. She slipped out of bed and walked into the bathroom. The sight of the large, clean shower brought tears to her eyes. She turned on the water, letting it run until steam filled the room, and then stepped under the hot cascade. It felt like more than just water washing over her skin. It felt like it was washing away the weeks of fear, the grime of despair, the constant, gnawing anxiety. She stood there for a long time, letting the warmth seep deep into her bones, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Her phone, which she had left charging on the nightstand, buzzed with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar. Her heart gave a little leap of fear, but she took a deep breath and answered, her voice still shaky. "Hello?" It was him, the man from the night before. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and kind, just as she remembered. "I hope you and the little one were able to get some rest." She assured him they had, her words tumbling out in a rush of gratitude. "That's good," he said. "I've spoken with someone. A social worker. Her name is Anna, and she's one of the best. She's going to call you in the next hour. She help you with everything, finding a more permanent place to live, job resources, whatever you need. You can trust her." He paused, then added, "Just focus on taking care of your son today. Let her handle the details. The hotel is paid for the next week, so don't worry about any of that. Just breathe." Before she could say anything more, he said a simple goodbye and hung up. He wasn't looking for thanks or praise. He was simply making sure the net he had thrown under her was secure. True to his word, the social worker called an hour later. Anna was warm, efficient, and treated her with a respect that was both surprising and deeply comforting. There was no judgment in her voice, only a professional and compassionate desire to help. By the end of the day, a plan was in motion. Anna had found 3 potential furnished apartments for her to view the next day. The man had already arranged for the deposit and 3 months' rent to be paid for whichever one she chose. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity that felt both surreal and wonderful. She chose a small, bright apartment in a quiet neighborhood with a park nearby. It had a small balcony where she could stand and feel the sun on her face. It had a kitchen where she could prepare a meal for herself. Best of all, it had a second bedroom that she could turn into a nursery for her son. Moving in felt like a monumental achievement. She didn't have much, just the few bags of new things she had bought at the pharmacy. But as she unpacked them, putting the tiny, soft clothes into the drawers of the crib, she felt a sense of ownership and pride she hadn't felt in months. This was her space. Their space. 6 months passed in a blur of change and growth. The young woman threw herself into building a new life for herself and her son. With Anna's help, she enrolled in an online course to update her office skills. She found a part-time job at a local community center, answering phones and helping with administrative tasks. The work was simple, but it gave her a routine, a purpose, and a small but steady income. Her son, no longer a fragile newborn, was thriving. He was a chubby, cheerful baby who filled their small apartment with gurgles and laughter. He learned to roll over, then to sit up, each small milestone a celebration for his mother. The fear that had once been her constant companion was replaced by a quiet confidence that bloomed in her chest. She was still tired, but it was a good kind of tired. The tiredness of a person building a future. Not a person just trying to survive. One sunny afternoon, she was sitting on the floor of the living room, watching her son play with a colorful set of stacking rings. He would babble happily as he tried to fit the rings onto the pole, his face scrunched in concentration. The apartment was filled with light, and the scent of the soup she had simmering on the stove hung in the air. It was a moment of perfect, ordinary happiness. As she watched her son, her mind drifted back to that cold, dark night on the curb. She thought about the man who had sat with her, who had listened to her story without judgment, and who had seen not a failure but a mother in need. She often wondered about him. She had seen his face on movie posters and in magazines since then, but she never tried to contact him. His request for anonymity felt like a final gift, a way for her to own her recovery without feeling like a charity case. She realized that his act of kindness had been about so much more than money. Money had paid for the apartment and the food, but it was his humanity that had healed her. He had looked at her, a woman at her lowest point, dirty and desperate in the back of a car, and he had seen her. He had seen her strength, her love for her child, and her deep-seated fear. He didn't just give her a handout. He gave her back her dignity. He reminded her that she was worthy of help, that she was a good mother. That simple affirmation had been the seed from which her new life had grown. He hadn't just saved her from the cold. He had saved her hope. He had restored her belief that there was goodness in the world, that strangers could care, and that even in the darkest of times, a single act of compassion could light the way forward. She looked at her son, who had finally managed to stack 2 rings and was now clapping his hands with delight, and she smiled through her tears. The man had given her a fresh start, a chance to build a world for her son filled with warmth, safety, and love. And in doing so, he had given her back something even more precious. He had given her back herself.